There's a lot of opportunities, I believe, with the advent of robotics to really allow small businesses to be more productive.
Welcome to Manufacturing Happy Hour, the podcast where we get real about the latest trends and technologies impacting modern manufacturers.
Manufacturing Happy Hour.
Each week, we interview industry experts that are at the top of their craft and give you the tools, tactics, and strategies you need to take your career and your business to the next level. And now, your host, Chris Lukey.
Hey, what's up, folks? Welcome to episode 74. Today, we're talking about deploying intelligent robots at scale. Our guest is Samir Menon, the founder and CEO of Dexterity. Dexterity is a company that delivers full-stack robot dexterity solutions for logistics, warehousing, and supply chain operations. But even before founding the company, Samir has been on a mission to leverage robotics to, quote, make repetition optional. What does that mean? Well, here are three things you can expect from today's show. First, we're going to get Samir's backstory, what got him into robotics, we'll talk a little pop culture, and how he made the shift from academia to starting a business. Second, we're going to learn about Dexterity, their mission, why they're focused on the warehousing space, and how robots can be deployed at scale. Finally, we'll get some additional leadership and robotics lessons in the context of Dexterity's recent rapid growth. All this and more on today's episode. If you want to learn more, you can head over to the show notes page at manufacturinghappyhour.com/74 to access any resource mentioned in this episode or to connect with Dexterity. Also, if you are enjoying this show, please consider leaving a 5-star rating and review over at Apple Podcasts. You can get there by going to manufacturinghappyhour.com/iTunes. And as always, I want to highlight the folks that are taking the time to leave reviews. And this one goes out to an individual named Reno Perk with a recent review that reads, Hoppy as a retro encabulator IPA. Okay, this is a reference back to episode 66. Here's what this individual has to say. Most industry podcasts provide a cure for insomnia. Chris does a great job of selecting guests and asking the questions that keep us engaged. Especially liked the recent discussion with Mike Kraft about the Wayback Machine known as the Retro Encabulator. Well, Reno Perk, thank you so much for leaving this review. If you're intrigued by this review, you can always head on back and listen to episode 66, but that's not the call to action here. If you want to leave a 5-star rating and review of your own and get a shout out on the show, please head over to Apple Podcasts by going to manufacturinghappyhour.com/iTunes. And with that, let's jump on in. It sounds like we're heading to Boston today for a virtual drink, or I guess more an audio drink, with Samir Menon. Okay, Samir, we've been looking to do this interview for a while. I'm excited to have you on. And in true manufacturing happy hour fashion, the first question has to be, if we were having this discussion in person, where would that be?
Well, I think if we were having it in the spirit of the true manufacturing and for us, warehousing logistics spirit, we'd be somewhere near Boston. I'm not a Boston native, so don't have a specific name, but any craft brewery would do. Big mug of beer and perhaps some nice packaged baked goods picked by our robots.
All right. Yeah. Ooh, I love the plug for baked goods bagged by robots. Excellent way to jump into the theme and say we're having that big mug of beer. My first question for is we want to get to know you a little bit. So what got you interested in robotics? Start at the beginning.
Excellent question. I've been interested in robotics since I was a kid. I grew up dreaming of robots. I got into high school, and when I was a kid, there was this movie called The High School of 2000. There were robots in it, and I'm like, sweet, I'm gonna have robots. But then there were none. Got into college, still no robots. Got into grad school at Stanford. Finally, there were robots, but they were, what we would call level 1 automation. These are pre-programmed robots, very precise, very reliable. But they kind of do the same thing over and over again. You get a little bit bored after watching them for 5 minutes. And so spent 10 years at Stanford really digging into robotics. I think got to know more and more about what it's all about. Started off working with simulation, with software, with hardware, with AI, controls, algorithms. And the more I dug into robotics, the more interesting it was. It's just this amazing field which is at the edge of adoption in our society. I think it's going to be a civilization changing event for us to truly adopt robotics all over, and it just gets me up every day in the morning. Very exciting.
I love that. I want to ask you about your time at Stanford, right? But you brought up something else in that answer that I have to ask about, and that it's you saw robots in a movie, right? Do you think pop culture is an influence for a lot of people that are in the robotic space now? Because we see them all over. We've seen them all over for decades, from movies like Short Circuit that show it from like a humorous standpoint to I guess the Terminator that shows it from a more noir, a darker standpoint. Did pop culture, do you think that influences a lot of people in the robotic space?
It most certainly does, and I try to categorize them into three broad, what you would call profiles. And so when you talk to, at least when I've spoken to people, there's definitely the Terminator camp. It's like, oh no, robots are out to get us.
Hmm.
And then there's the cutesy kind of silly, eccentric, like I like to call it the Wall-E, if you remember
Yeah.
the Wall-E cartoon. So
Hmm.
there's the Terminator, there's the Wall-E, and then there's a Roomba, of course, which we already. Oh yeah, robots! I got a Roomba in my house. My cat plays with it all day long. And so the truth is a little bit different from all of those, of course, but it's very exciting as we stepping into today's world. Robots are seeing increasing adoption. We're stepping beyond the Roomba to drones, autonomous cars. There's this massive initiative in robot mobility over the past 20 years, which I think has broadened the public's perception of a robot. And as we're stepping into the next phase of robotics, which is try to move up even further ahead from mobility into intelligent robots working alongside us, I think a similar transition will happen again.
Well, I think that's a great segue because, as I understand it, when you decided to focus on robotics at Stanford, you were specifically interested in it from robots moving in a human like manner, right? All the examples you just gave were the cutesy example, like Wally, Terminator, the dark example, and then the, home robots like Roomba is kind of fun, but, none of these really accurately depict robotics or really the true value. So, why did you decide to focus on robots moving in a human-like manner as the subject for your PhD?
Bringing back, the comment that I made earlier, when robotics started, we've had robots with us since the 1970s, the 1980s. By the 1980s, they were definitely in manufacturing sites, and those first generation robots that were completely focused on precision, they were very useful in manufacturing because you could make the manufacturing environment precise. And if a robot's precise, the environment has to be precise, otherwise it doesn't work. Imagine you're really precise, and the world is shaking,
Mhm.
gonna mess up big time. By the late 90s, early 2000s, I think there was a popular consensus in robotics as a whole across academia industry that getting robots to do stuff in the real world was pretty hard. And so there was a transition away from robots that do stuff towards robots that move, hence 2 decades of robot mobility in drones, Roombas, autonomous cars. It's really done well.
Mhm.
When I started off at Stanford, we were well along the way with the robot mobility initiative. And for me, robotics always had a personified aspect. I had my big teddy bear, and I would always
Mhm.
imagine it was like running around. My kid has a similar tiger, and he's like, oh yeah, it's
Mhm.
going to run around. And that personified aspect, I think, is it requires robots that have a form factor or maybe arms, the ability to do stuff, not just move. And
Mhm.
so that was very exciting for me. I spent a lot of time at Stanford trying to understand how humans move. And humans have a very amazing ability to move with skill, with grace, with a fluid intelligence that allows you to do things that you've never done before. And mentally build a model of the world, wrap your head around novel things, contextualize. Hey, I'm standing next to a shelf. I've got to behave a little bit differently than if the context is that I'm standing next to a conveyor belt. And so there's a lot of aspects of machine learning and intelligence that go into allowing robots to operate and do stuff. That was very exciting to me. And we spent almost 10 years trying to understand how humans move and how we could summarize the essence of what it means to move in a human-like manner using math, and then use that same math to drive the robots and have them move in a human-like manner. So it was very exciting, and very excited to put that into production with what we're doing at Dexterity now.
And just I'm going to ask about Dexterity after this, but just like a quick date check, right? Just so people have an idea of when this work was taking place. When did you start your PhD at Stanford?
I started my PhD in 2009,
Okay.
finished in 2017.
Okay. So, I mean, things have been evolving rapidly, right? I mean, this is barely over 10 years ago. And my next question to this is, what led you to go from academia into a startup then, starting your own company? Ultimately, what led you to start Dexterity?
Startups are quite an experience, and if there's anybody out there in academia who's thinking about this transition, you should listen. There's When we think about startups, I think they come in many shapes and forms, right? And for me, a startup is not so much about the startup; it's really about solving problems. And that was the mindset that I had walking into my PhD. I wanted to figure out some very interesting problems with what it means to move in a human-like manner. And I think by the end of it, there was a very real problem approaching in the logistics and supply chain industry around 2016, 2017, in that there's demographic change where a lot of folks are getting older. There's younger generations aren't particularly interested in a lot of the very, very intensive types of work that are required. And once you start digging into supply chain and logistics, it's the backbone of our civilization. We don't really think very much about what it takes to get a box of cereal on the shelf, or to eat your bun in the morning, or get a jar of ice cream. And so those problems were very interesting to me because I felt they had impact on a large number of people in the world, and there was a looming crisis which only got exacerbated by this whole corona pandemic. And so I think it was a problem of helping us, the logistics and supply chain industry, deal with a very crazy labor shortage that really got me excited. And we felt like we had the skill set to do something about it.
So let's get to know Dexterity a little bit more. You talk about the supply chain challenges pre-COVID as well, which I think a lot of people think all of a sudden COVID was where we ran into issues, but clearly that was taking place before. Can you,
Yeah.
let's say we're having that big mug of beer. How would you define Dexterity's mission in simple terms if we were having this conversation over a drink?
To keep it really simple, if we take any repetitive manual laborious work, Dexterity's mission is to take that repetitive work and make it optional. Right now in our lives, there's a lot of times where we just have to do repetitive work. I've never met a single person in my whole life who said, "Hey, I wake up every day in the morning and my brain gets fired up to do the same thing I did yesterday. And not
Yeah.
just that, I'm going to be fired up 20 years later doing exactly the same thing I'm doing today." Nobody does that, right? So
Yes.
let's just, if you like doing repetitive stuff, like I like eating food, it's a great type of repetition. I want to do that. I don't like doing laundry. Let's get it, at least give me the option to get a
Right.
robot to do it. So that's our mission.
I love it because that's actually it's actually my next question, right? You say making repetition optional, right? I think I have a vision of what that might look like, but maybe give some examples of the type of repetition you're making optional or the type of applications that Dexterity is most focused on right now.
Yeah, so the type of applications that we are most focused on right now are where, so we're very focused on logistics and warehousing, uh,
Hmm.
partly because it's been very intensely hit by events over the past few years, and before that as well. Within logistics and warehousing, which is a very massive industry, we're really focused on what we call high speed distribution. So when we think about high speed distribution, what this means is a market in vertical like parcel, where you have parcels, they come, you land them in a store, they get sorted in facilities, and they make their way across the country and somewhere else. You have to quickly pick one, you have to scan it, you have to check it, you have to route it into the right way. Uh, there's there's a non-stop repetitive activity of, say, pick, scan, quality check, move a parcel.
Hmm.
And this is the type of work that is very difficult to staff, where there's a chronic shortage of folks who want to do it. and where robots can have a constructive impact on society. Packaged food is another high-speed distribution problem where you have a bakery that makes, say, a massive amount of white bread. Well, white bread's going to go 20 white bread in one store, 15 in
Hmm.
one store, 5 in one store, to, I don't know, 35 in a massive store. And so somebody's got to do that entire distribution. And so anytime you've got to move stuff really fast. It's not just about storing it. It's about getting it in, getting it out the door. It's a lot of manual work, very hard on people's bodies, and there's a labor shortage. So those are the types of things that we are really focused on.
Two great examples from warehousing, scanning, picking, placing to food and beverage. Love that you put that into context for us. I'm going to flip the question a little bit now because that's what robots are meant to do, right? The repetitive tasks. So, this is a bit of a philosophical question then. So, what are humans really meant to do if this is the type of work that robots are picking up?
Absolutely. I think humans should really, I wouldn't go so far as to say what humans are meant to do. I think human beings are, very, they have a strong will and they like doing what they like to do.
Sure.
I think my goal is more enable people, to, give them the intellectual bandwidth, give them the time, give them the productivity of a modern industrialized economy to allow them to really focus on what they like doing. And so it's not so much about dictating what people should do, but giving them more choice over their own future and their ability to allocate their time.
Hmm.
Potentially, in an industrial aspect, of course, it's uh, obviously to transition people to higher value work. Um, I think once upon a time, there used to be this thing called the printing press. And when it came along, before that, people used to sit on papyrus and I don't know, squid ink and just like scribe
Hmm.
on, right? And the printing press came along and it helped everyone. It was a form of automation. I think robots will come along and they'll help everyone, allow us to do better things instead of just scribing work. We can actually author our own books, and so in the same way, instead of maybe performing repetitive sort of tasks, we can allocate our intellect towards things that really push us to the next level.
Well, I think even directly tied to robotics right now, right? You and I just a couple months ago were at A3's AMRs and Logistics Conference in Memphis. And I feel like there were different terms that would come up, right? Like robot Sherpas or crew chiefs, whatever they are, right? Different ways to describe the people that are leading robotics operations and robotic strategy, right? Because the second that robots take over the work that someone else was doing, now you need people, very likely the same people, just repurposing jobs in many ways, leading that operation at that point. So that's one of the most direct tie-ins I see. What about do you see that as one of the big things as well?
Yeah, robot supervisors, robot technicians. Another thing that's happening is there's a lot of opportunities. I believe with the advent of robotics, to really allow small businesses to be more productive. What does this mean? In the past, when we had robots, if you wanted to deploy robots, you had to set up $100 million production line. Now, if you have intelligent robots, you don't need to set up $100 million production line and make the environment perfect. You just need maybe a couple $100,000 in robotic hardware and a subscription to an AI platform. All of a sudden, in the past, only really large businesses could leverage automation. I hope, and I would work towards allowing small businesses or even individuals to leverage robots as tools that they come, they can pick up contracts, they can do their thing, use
Hmm.
robotics as a tool, and get a lot of work done vis-a-vis what they could done before. So I would love to see, robotics enable people to sort of build their own small businesses, take a lot of productivity into their own hands. Now it's a bit of a dreamy goal, I must admit, and
Sure.
easier said than done. But I think that's another way this could go is I have like 5 of my robots and I go out deploy them here or there and I run my own small business. Can we help people do that? I think that's great.
Well, I love that you're getting into what I envision as like the future of robotics, for lack of a better word, right? And I hope I'm not making this up, but I feel like I've heard dexterity in the context of deploying robots at scale, right? That's one of your visions. So, you give an example of these 5 robots, small business, etc. Can you go into what deploying robots at scale looks like maybe a bit further? I think that would help the audience out quite a bit.
Absolutely. And I think Tesla provided an excellent analogy. And so let me just use that analogy. When any type of new system comes in, initially it's lower volume. It's geared towards a very specific audience. It's high cost. With Tesla, that was the Model S, which is a fancy car geared towards a small audience and high cost. It's still pretty pricey, and that kind of allows you to step towards larger volume, lower cost, like more mass market systems. So in the same way, Dexterity has started off with what we call large enterprise when it comes to thinking about robotics at scale. Our initial customers are all large multinational enterprise organizations with operations that span at least the whole country, if not multiple countries. That allows us to come in, have a very constructive path to production, have an ability to go through the startup life cycle. As we keep on ramping, there's a second phase that would kick in outside the large enterprise sort of logistics warehousing space, where we transition increasingly out of enterprise warehousing and logistics into what we would call mid-market or small medium businesses. And I think that's where some of the true impact will start to show.
It's almost like this is the democratization of robots right now, right?
That
Like
would be
it has been something that, for various reasons, cost, accessibility, etc., have been limited more to these large enterprises. Everyone has visions of a car manufacturing facility with tons of robots, right? But what you're talking about is bringing this to small to medium sized businesses as well and allowing them to leverage that technology. And on that note, I have another question related to the problem you're solving, right? This is a big theme on manufacturing happy hour. When it comes to startups, you got to be focused on the problem, your market, etc. Technology is just the driver that enables you to do that. So you're rethinking warehouses and supply chain, right? Of all the problems you could have solved with robotics, why was this the one that you doubled down on?
I think with the problem, it comes down to basically there's a technical aspect and then there's a market aspect. And when we look at the path of technical progress, robotics is broadly, it's very well established in manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think there's some edge cases which would still use robotics, but first pass manufacturing has robots. Now, the technical sort of spectrum is really a spectrum of increasing complexity, uncertainty, sort of dynamic variations in the environment. And I think the moment you step out of a manufacturing plant, the first thing you do is you enter a warehouse. And so even this first step was inaccessible to past technology. And so that's one. For the technical one, it's a big market. It's the first step along the path of increasing intelligence and increasing ability to adapt to the environment. So that's an obvious first step for us, coinciding with a very massive need in the market. So I think technically it was a logical next step, and the market was really ready for it. So it was a no-brainer.
Excellent. Now, another question I have around this goes back to something we brought up earlier about you started Dexterity before COVID was a thing, right? Before everyone was hyper aware of supply chain issues. What were the things that you saw that this was already becoming an issue? Because I think one thing that's come up before, it's like COVID didn't necessarily change anything for our industry per se. It just sped a lot of things that were probably going to happen anyway up. But how did you realize there was an opportunity here, a challenge here for the industry before something so obvious like COVID was in place?
So I've really made an effort throughout my career. There's some people who look at what's going on today.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at what's going on today and you respond to that, you're probably already too late, right? So can you backtrack? Can you think about what's going to happen a few years from now? And so let's take a industry like warehousing, right? How can you predict what's going to happen a few years from now? Well, let's look at the life cycle of a warehouse. Today, there's a fully functional warehouse. One step before that, it was a warehouse that maybe only had its equipment. Before that, it was an empty warehouse where the equipment was still to be installed. Before that, it was a plot of land, right? And when it's a plot of land, then you don't know what's going to happen with it. So, but that being said, you can definitely backtrack all the way to say, hey, is there a plot of land that's getting converted into a warehouse? Because you know what? 2 years later, it's going to be a warehouse, and 1 year or 2 years after that, it's going to be a warehouse full of equipment, and 1 year
Hmm.
after that, it's going to be buzzing with activity. So, looking at the real estate market was actually a pretty interesting thing that we did. And it was a great leading indicator in that warehouse construction had grown, I believe, like 7 or 8x in the past 5, 7 years before COVID hit. And so there was a lot of warehouses being constructed, man. And,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, that's a good sign that 4 or 5 years later, there's going to be a lot of work to be done.
Paying attention to the signs, paying attention to real estate. I love this. Now, given everything that's going on, would you say robotics are being adopted at the pace you'd expect right now, or are we slacking? Do you think there could be more? What are your thoughts on that?
I think the industry is full steam ahead. The tricky thing with adoption is that when we look at mission critical systems like logistics and supply chain, nothing can go wrong. Right?
Hmm.
You mess up one parcel delivery, there's a very annoyed person at the other end, right? You go out and crinkle the packaging of a loaf of bread. Well, guess what? That's the only one that doesn't get bought. It's still sitting on the store. I've always gone to a store. There was like little dink box or something
Hmm.
like that. I'm like, ah, not that one. Everything's
Yep.
perfectly on the inside, but just psychologically, it doesn't feel right. Like, why do I get this?
Totally.
You know, and or a can that's a little bit bent or something like that. And so anytime you're in a mission critical application, it's important to realize that the system must work perfectly. And the tricky thing with robots is that they learn, right? And they don't learn overnight. They take some time to really get exposed. So I think within the confines of the fact that it's a mission critical application, we can't tolerate very much going wrong. And there's a certain ramp up in technology. I think we're moving really fast, like really fast, faster than we anticipated. Let's put it that way.
Before I wrap up this portion of the interview, I think one question that's in my mind, it's like we're talking about democratizing robots, making them more accessible, deploying them at scale. What's an actionable piece of advice that you would offer for manufacturers out there that are like, yeah, there are things that I could automate or that I could deploy robots on, but I haven't been able to do it before. Costs, whatever the issues are. What's the actionable piece of advice that you give people, whether it's a mindset shift or a way to get started with robots today where they can start getting on that journey so that way we really truly can start seeing robots get democratized?
I think the most critical thing is to understand that even if you decide to press the go button and you say, all right, I'm in, I want this stuff, there's going to be some time, right? It's not like you're going to say, go give me 10,000 robots and they land at your doorstep tomorrow morning. It just doesn't happen, right? And 10,000 is usually a very small number when it comes to the larger scheme of things. So my 2 cents as somebody who's been there in the trenches is that if you are thinking about deploying robots, come talk to us now. I think you need to have the executive vision to work against a multi-year timeline. This is a bit like digital transformation in the IT systems. You didn't computerize your entire non-computerized system overnight, right? Like it took a long time. And so getting the ball rolling, even if it's rolling in a limited manner to allow you to understand the problem better, to build a working relationship, to allow sort of vendors to build out that supply chain and deliver to you. I think getting the ball rolling soon is extremely important, and one has to have at least a few years of future vision to make it go.
I
It's
love
really
the Yeah, no, I love the emphasis on vision and planning, right? I think there have been too many knee jerk reactions to digital transformation or all these buzzwords we hear where someone's like, "We got to start now." It's like, well, yeah, you need to start now, but you need to really start planning now and recognizing it doesn't happen overnight. So, and for everyone listening out there, by the way, we'll have links to Dexterity over at manufacturinghappyhour.com. Dexterity.ai is the quickest way to get there. But for ways to connect with you, we'll make sure to have those over on the show notes page. I do have a few wrap up questions before we get out of here. And one of them is you just landed your Series B funding round to the tune of $140 million. So what's next for Dexterity?
Um, I think next is we're taking that capital. By the way, very grateful. A quick shout out to our investors, Kleiner Perkins, Lightspeed Ventures, Obvious Ventures. B37. There's a few others. We've really benefited, I think, from having investors who could see the vision and were ready to double down. Our Series B was an internal round. We didn't go out to the market. We just closed it out, and we're putting that money to use, building out the infrastructure to really deploy robots. By transition kind of from the hundreds to the thousands and beyond.
Yeah, and one of the questions I always have is, this is more of a leadership question than a technical question. When you get that type of funding, right, there's a scaling question within your own company, right? So how do you lead through this scale up that you're going to have to do as the leader of Dexterity?
So I think the important thing to realize is 150 40 whatever $million. It sounds like a big number, but it does run out pretty fast, right? Like, it's in a capital intensive business. When I think of scaling, we tend to be pretty sort of conservative, and we run a very lean ship. It's not like the hype driven Valley startup where you start buying gold plated shoes and things like that. No, I still buy $12 Old Navy shoes.
Yeah.
So there's it's pretty important to focus on what is really important and what really delivers the long term success. And for us, building out an operations organization, building out a customer support network, making sure that we have access to sort of engineering personnel who can maybe handle any sort of customer requests as they come in, to make sure that we have our existing product lines, and our existing product lines are in fulfillment, which is like distribution. We have existing product lines in parcel, in sort of industrial distribution, mixed case palletizing, depalletizing, that those are augmented by new product lines that would allow us to capture the entire sort of end-to-end experience in a logistics workflow. Beyond that, working with our supply chain network, as you know, there's a supply chain shortage of just about everything.
Right.
We need to lock in some inventory. If you have to deploy some robots next year, you kind of have to place the orders now and really build those relationships. So the money is expended in ramping up the team, building our infrastructure, keeping our product lines well staffed, and opening new product lines, and then just building our supply chain connections.
Well, I think the macro takeaway that I got from that comment is, it's like, while it might seem like a lot of money, one, this is a capital intensive industry. So, that money only goes so far. But the other thing I hear is, money aside, you got to stay focused on the vision. You can't all of a sudden splurge on things you don't need, whether it's the gold shoes or whether it's something that isn't a business necessity, for example. Yeah. So I love the color you provided there. Last question I've got for you is, we've covered a lot of ground today. I appreciate all the time you've taken. And by the way, congrats on that funding round. That is no small feat. Is there anything you wish I would have brought up that we haven't covered?
Well, there's one plug which I always like to put is, when as an outsider, when somebody looks at a new industry, one needs some sort of mental handrails to really get a feel for what's going on. And we put together what we call a 6-level sort of robotic progress spectrum, and it's loosely modeled off the autonomous driving industry's 5 levels of robot autonomy. And so, the first level, of course, is pre-programmed industrial robots from the 1980s. The second level is the same pre-programmed sort of industrial robots, or maybe swapped out with a collaborative robot, but now it has maybe a camera thrown onto it, right? So all of a sudden it's got eyes and it's AI and really cool and all of that. But it's still essentially what we would call a single task function, right? Like, it's more or less doing the same thing, right, in a structured environment. And so that's what we call level 2. Level 3 for us is once we start leaving the single task function behind and we head towards multitask. So you have robots that are working with other robots. They have the sense of touch. They have not just sight, but maybe sound, touch, feeling, human level senses, the ability to operate in a very unstructured environment, share information with other robots, cooperate with each other, maybe step out of the way and do something else if a robot's doing something in its own work zone. And so you really start approaching what we would call a full-time equivalent, or an FTE, around level 3. Level 4 is when you really have the FTE nailed down. And that's when robots are collaborating not just with other robots, but also with people. And they're really, you have robots that are operating in a very, very robotic way, aka level 3. Oftentimes, a person who's working with the robot, it might not be very safe. It might be a bit of a pain. Robots operating in a robotic manner can make life hell for you. Suddenly, a robot says, I need help, and 100 feet that way, and then this one says, oh, I need help, and I come running all the way back, and you're just like bouncing around like a tennis ball, right? So level
Yeah.
4, that problem of human robot sort of interaction in a safe manner and an efficient manner. And if the robots need to be 2% less efficient to make a person 50% more efficient, so be it, right? Level 4 allows us to really get the technical spectrum nailed down.
Mm-hmm.
Now you get to level 5, which is where you rethink how you build your whole operations and redesign the operations, taking intelligent, collaborative human robot interaction as a baseline, and leads to a pretty different type of operation when we think about warehouses and whatnot. So we've been in production with level 4 for almost 2 years now, and heading into, we're just deploying our first level 5 systems as we speak. Beyond level 5, we come to level 6, which is where once you have enough robots deployed, the robots actually have the ability to really help you optimize your entire network. So far, when we think of the flow of goods, most of the flow of goods are captured in a database, but a database tells you what is supposed to be going on. Most of the time is 5-10% different from, hey, there's supposed to be 15 boxes of cereal on that shelf, but they've actually made 12. Why?
Yeah.
Well, one got crushed, one got old and moldy, and one just ended up on the electronics box because somebody just put it there. And so the robots can not just sort of tell you what's supposed to be going on, they can tell you what is going on and actively fix stuff by working together in a team. So that's what we call level 6, which is a few years away. But for anybody out there, if you want to put your wrap your head around what's going on in robotics, just think about these levels. Level 1, brain dead, pre-programmed robots. Level 2, smart robot. Level 3, robots working in a team. Level 4, robots and people working in teams. Level 5, new warehouse. Level 6, digital transformation.
Excellent summary. And I'm glad you brought it up too, because I remember you referencing level 1 robots at the start of our conversation. So I'm glad you added that detail, because I know the folks that are really into robotics have been listening all the way through this conversation today. So Samir, I just want to thank you for taking the time to jump on today's show. For everyone out there, Dexterity.ai, or head to the show notes at manufacturinghappyhour.com. And Samir, hopefully we'll have a chance to have a beverage in person again here as 2022 gets rolling.
Would love to. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks a bunch. Cheers. Hey, thanks for listening, and a big thanks to Samir and the team over at Dexterity for helping make this episode possible. Coincidentally, non-coincidentally, Michael Patrick Perry from Dexterity was actually featured in our recent AMR and Logistics episode we did at the A3 conference. He's in part 2 of those 12 interviews that we did, so 6 interviews per episode. Feel free to head on back to listen to that to hear about Dexterity from the perspective of another individual on the team. But as always, if you liked this episode, if you want to learn more, head on over to manufacturinghappyhour.com/74. That's where you can connect with Samir. That's where you can connect with Dexterity, get to their website. Their website's also super simple. It's dexterity.ai. Anything you need to do to follow up on today's show. Before we wrap up, I do want to thank our sponsor for today's episode, Obvious Ventures. Obvious Ventures is a venture capital firm investing in entrepreneurs that are reimagining every sector of the global economy. They help transform legacy industries like pharmaceuticals, protein therapy, industrial materials, and manufacturing. And in fact, their managing director, Nan Lee, was just featured in episode 71 of Manufacturing Happy Hour. But as a tie into today's episode, they just launched their own podcast called Machine Visions. Samir was actually a guest on this show as well, and I'd highly recommend giving that episode a listen. I certainly did as I was prepping for today's conversation. Anyway, to learn more about Obvious Ventures and the Machine Visions podcast, make sure to tune into episode 71 by heading to manufacturinghappyhour.com/71. Thank you, Obvious Ventures, for sponsoring this podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and review over at Apple Podcasts. I love reading your reviews at the start of the episode, so if you do that, doesn't need to be long, could just be a couple sentences. All you got to do is hit that 5-star button, type some characters to share your thoughts, and that's it. Head to manufacturinghappyhour.com/iTunes. It'll take you directly to the Apple Podcasts platform. on your desktop or on your iPhone. And with that, that's a wrap for this week. Thanks as always for sticking around. Stay innovative, stay thirsty. We'll catch you again next time. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Manufacturing Happy Hour, powered by the Industrial Network.